please welcome Mr. Bruno Le Maire, Minister of Economy and Finance of France. Mr. Johan van Overtveldt, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce well, I'm trying, Minister of Finance of Belgium. Mr. Pierre Gramegna, Minister of Finance of Luxembourg. And Mr. Šapoka, Minister of Finance of Lithuania. I am deeply honored, and I forgot my deep friend, Giles, who is the chairman of Zopa, a big fintech, European fintech from UK. Nobody is perfect. So, very honored to have this extraordinary panel today. We wanted, when we built this event, to show that we are speaking of Europe, not only of France or Paris. We all know that today the fight on every subject, not only finance, is a global one, it's a world one, so it's not only discussing of a country. So again, thank you very much for coming. We have less than 1 hour because Mr. Le Maire is leaving at 5:30, so we'll try to do in the timing. A few questions to discuss about what the future of finance at digital and fintech age, and of course, at Brexit time. So we will ask you exactly the same question to each of you and let you 2 to 4 minutes to answer each of them. Please don't take 15-minute speech by question. And we'll try to moderate that way. So first question, and I will begin by Mr. Le Maire. We are in Paris, so begin by France. What have you done to promote the rise of new technology in finance industry and foster the fintech development in the last few years?
First of all, thank you for hosting that meeting, and I'm really very happy to have all my friends here in Paris at that round table. I think it's a very good opportunity to explain that Paris will become the new, most important financial center in Europe in the coming years, and that's our willingness and our goal. I just wanted, first of all, to insist on all the improvements on the market that will be linked to the development of that new technologies and the fintechs. I think it's good news for the market, for the development of the market. That's good news for the private companies, and especially for the small companies that are always trying to find new way of funding their investment, innovation. And I think that fintechs will provide exactly the tools that are needed for the small size companies. And third, I think that for the population also, this is a very good opportunity to have access to another set of fundings. So we are really willing to develop those fintechs and to provide to the startups and to all the framework of the fintechs the best available framework that might be available on the European stage. Secondly, I would like to insist on the technologies themselves that are at the core of the fintechs. For instance, blockchain. We are one of the first countries, with Luxembourg, I think, that has allowed the institutions, the banks, to develop the blockchain. And I strongly believe that the blockchain is really the future of fintechs and one of the most promising technologies that we have now on the table. And third, if we want to develop the fintechs, we need to have that new framework, which is more efficient, less costly for the fintechs. That's why we have decided with the President to reduce the level of taxes, and we have decided a full overhaul of the French tax system. We have introduced a corporate tax of 30% on the capital revenues. We have decided to reduce the level of the corporate tax. We have had the courage to get rid of the so-called wealth tax, and I can assure you that it requires a lot of courage if you want to get rid of the wealth tax in France, but we did it. And I think that that new tax system will provide the efficient framework for the best development of the fintechs in France. The last point on which I would like to insist is that you need also to support innovation. And that's a key of the economic policy of the French government and of the French president. We have decided to maintain the level of the so-called Crédit Impôt Recherche, which is a tax help for research and innovation in France, and it will help us to maintain a good level of research and innovation in France. And we have also taken that very important decision to sell some public assets for the sake of funding what we call a fund for disruptive innovation. Because we strongly believe that after the blockchain, there will come some new technologies, and we have to think now about the technologies of the future. We have to fund now the technologies of the future, and that fund for disruptive innovation with 10 billion euros will be the key for financing disruptive innovation in France in the future, especially for the fintechs.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I have quite the same question for you, Mr. Minister of Belgium.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all, on my part, also express my gratitude that I can be here. It's an honor for me to be here. And I have a monologue of about 20 minutes in the subject.
If you can make it 4, we appreciate.
Which you wouldn't allow me to take. So I'll be brief on 3 issues, specifically on the question, what have we done in terms of fintech, or broadly speaking, technological development. First of all, we created a collaborative ecosystem called Beehive, in which we bring together the traditional financial companies, banks, insurance companies, and the like, on the one hand, and on the other hand, let's say the high-tech companies who are in the field of fintech or closely related fields, and thirdly, also the market structure companies like Swift, Euroclear, BN, and New York Mellon. MasterCard, and 5 million euros was put into it by the government sector or by the government investment company, and 5 million came from the private sector. We have now offices in Brussels, London, New York, and Tel Aviv. We'll soon be opening in Singapore, and we're really seeing great opportunity. I think we come back to that, how the interaction can work between, let's say, with all due respect, the traditional financial sector on the one hand and the high-tech sector on the other hand. A second initiative that is highly relevant, I think, for the what we are discussing today is our corporate tax reform that we did at the end of last year, where we brought down the base rate from 34 to 29 as of January the 1st of this year, and it will be 25 by January the 1st, 2020. With respect to corporate tax issues, we also broadened what we call the patent box system, which is a kind of, to make it a little bit simple, extra tax deductibility for patent developments. That existed already, but in 2016 we broadened the definition of what can be brought into this patent box system. For example, all kinds of software developments are now also eligible for this tax deductibility system. And last but not least, but I think quite important for the future, and maybe a little bit specifically Belgium, we have a lot of investment funds, smaller investment funds. So there is huge amount of money for startups. We have a problem with respect to scale-ups, companies who go into their second phase of development, and so we try to get to larger investment funds, and that's we are setting up as of now what we call the kind of fund that should make it possible, should make it attractive, that investment funds come together, create a bigger investment. I'm thinking about investment funds of €500 million. That's the size that we need. And that should, of course, also help technological development in general, and certainly also fintech developments.
Mr. Šapoka, we were speaking earlier and I learned something. You told me proudly that Lithuania was the most digital nation in the world, and I mistakenly had thought it was Estonia. But what have you done in particular with regards to the fintech industry?
First of all, good evening, everyone. It's indeed an honor to be here among you. And I'll start with saying why I do like fintech, so what I do like the most. Because fintech is about consumers. Consumers are great, again, in this industry. So what we did in this respect in Lithuania, just a year ago, also in Paris, I promised to remove all kind of necessary barriers for fintech industry, and we did it. So what we did in other fields, for example, in regulatory framework. So in Lithuania, licensing process usually takes not months, but just a month, without lowering the quality of standards. The central bank, our supervisor, introduced newcomers program to facilitate the process with all kind of issues which are very important, compliance and processes. They learn from Fintech, and Fintech learns from supervisor. Also, what we did, the central bank introduced blockchain sandbox regime, which is also very important that you can use central bank's platform in order to experiment and try your products. So Lithuania is the first country in the world allowing non-banks to access Zopa through the central bank. And a lot of good things are happening in this area. Talking about fintech, we are talking about creativity, and we should take into account talents. So our university is constantly increasing the number of IT guys learning, and this pool is almost unlimited, and this is of utmost importance. Talking about tax regime, Lithuania recently introduced the best package for high-tech industry. If our tax rate is quite low, it's just 15%, what we did in addition to that, if you invest into research and development, you can deduct expenditure 3 times. If you invest into new technologies, you can deduct from your profit up to 100%. We introduced our innovation or patent box, so if you commercialize inventions, you pay just 5%. So I don't have this haircut of Donald Trump, but as he said in Davos that the US is the best place to invest, at least in fintech industry, currently Lithuania is the best country to invest. and it has a very clear justification because in Lithuanian fintech hub is growing in the fastest pace of the whole EU. Also, there are other tech areas, and we should think about, as it was told, that the future is already now. We should invest into new technologies because we cannot predict which particular technology will prevail and will boom in the future. We talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about big data, we talk about blockchain. But actually nobody knows, and the same situation is just before the internet started to grow. Therefore, we should focus also on business models, how they can be very fast in introducing new technologies, how they can adapt to this new environment. So I do believe that fintech can change financial world, but in a good sense. As I said, now consumer is great again.
And Monsieur Gramegna, what would you say Luxembourg has done to promote and encourage fintech investment?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and be able to speak in front of such a big audience here in Paris. And I take up the challenge of Bruno Le Maire. He wants to make Paris the largest and best financial center in the world, and we're ready to compete. And that's what it's all about. I mean, there's place for everyone. There's lots of opportunities, and the fintech industry is shaking up the old models. Now, what we did in Luxembourg, I'd like to focus on 3 issues. One is cooperation between public and private. The second one is talk a little bit about blockchain, and the third one, talk about cybersecurity and data centers. First of all, on cooperation between public and private. We have the chance of having developed a financial center over the last 40 years that is one of the most important in Europe. We are number 2 in the investment fund industry after the United States. So America is number 1 and we are number 2. That's good enough for us. And so that means that there's a lot of potential customers for fintech companies in the field of investment funds. The same goes for banks. We have 143 banks in Luxembourg. They all need and are seeking new technology. So what we did, we created the Luxembourg House of Financial Technologies. The acronym is LOFT. And in this LOFT, which is an accelerator, in less than a year, we have 15 startups who are there. Now you might say 15 is a low number, but the quality is high. And we have dozens in the pipeline. What is key here is that you meet all the people you need to meet. That means besides meeting competitor startups, you mean the traditional players, the ones who can become your clients on the one hand, you meet the university, you meet lawyers, you meet representatives of the regulator. And as Overtveldt, who is the new regulator in Paris, said, the regulators must be open to listen to the needs of the new companies. At the same time, we have a framework, European one, that needs to be complied with. So we need to find the right balance between listening to the needs, not stifling competition, fostering innovation at the same time, having a good framework. My second point is about ledger technology or blockchain. This is one of the results of the Luxembourg House of Fintech, is that we're developing a project called InfraChain, which adds an additional layer on the blockchain, a layer that makes access to blockchain more consumer-friendly, more business-friendly. And I agree with Bruno Le Maire that blockchain and ledger technology is there to stay and is going to change the way we do business together. My third point is about data center and cybersecurity. Luxembourg has decided already quite some years ago, even before I decided that fintech was really key, which is now back 4 years, but already 10 years ago, to invest a lot in data centers. Now 30% of the highest level data centers, tier 4 data centers in Europe, are in Luxembourg, and more than 10% in the world are located there. Why is that important? Well, obviously, what is fueling the fintech is data. And in order to thrive on data, you need to have data centers. And so we have done that, both on public side and encourage private investors to do it. And my last point, going with data centers, is cybersecurity. Our university has specialized on that, and cybersecurity is a key issue in order to develop a fintech safely. And we see every day that the issue of security needs to be handled very seriously. Now, Luxembourg has, as many of you know, given up its bank secrecy to go over to security in financial services. I think these are the 3 main measures that explain what we're doing and why we're being successful.
So, thank you very much for all this love declaration to fintech. So we see blockchain love declaration, tax as usual competition, and friendly competition between our different European states. Mr. Le Maire, beside all this support you can give to the new technology in finance and fintechs, do you see any danger, perhaps, or issues that could come with these new players on just the digital disruption in finance industry?
Yes, I think there are some dangers that we really have to avoid. The first one is to enter into a kind of tax dumping among European member states. I think that fair competition between Luxembourg, Lithuania, France, Belgium, Germany, to be more attractive, everybody can understand that. But going the way of a tax dumping, maybe on the corporate tax, for instance, would be a mistake for everybody. And I think that a race to the bottom cannot be the purpose for European countries. So that's the first point I would like to underline. A fair competition among member states, yes. A tax dumping, to have really a limited level of corporate tax, with a very strong competition among member states would be a mistake. We have decided to reduce the level of corporate tax from 33.3% because we had one of the most important corporate tax among European members to 25% by 2022. But I think that we have to find the right balance, as Pierre said, and to find the way of cooperation instead of violent competition among member states. And once again, the race to the bottom cannot be the purpose and the political purpose for European countries. The second concern I would like to underline is the risk of having money laundering, financing of terrorism through those new technologies. And I fully share the point of view expressed on this stage on the necessity of having a regulation. Regulation does not mean that we are opposed to new technologies. Regulation does only mean that we want to create the right framework for a fair development of the fintechs. Look at the Bitcoin. We have nothing against the Bitcoins, but everybody is aware that there is a risk of speculation, there is a high level of risk of money laundering through the Bitcoin. So you can manage to have both a regulation of the Bitcoin, and that's why with Germany we are pushing for having that kind of reflection inside the G20 on the right regulation of the Bitcoin. And on the other side, we are supporting the blockchain. I've listened to some people explaining, well, the French finance minister is opposed to any new technologies because he wanted the regulation of the Bitcoin. No, that's not fair. That's not our goal. And I think that you can draw the line between the new technologies, we are very supportive. Between the blockchain, we are once again one of the first nations among the European nations to have introduced and allowed the use of the blockchain in the financial institutions. And on the other side, the necessity of having a fair regulation of the Bitcoin. The third risk is the lack of innovation, of disruptive innovation. And let's be clear, just to answer to your very fair and very important remark. Nobody knows what the future will be, but we all know that we have to invest on the future. That's the purpose of the Fund for Disruptive Innovation. We have to put some money on innovations that we do not know whether they will be efficient or not. We are used to fund normal innovation, incremental innovation in France and in other European countries. Now we have also to fund disruptive innovation. You put money on some new technologies, you don't know whether they will be efficient or not, but you know that you have to try. Maybe you will fail, but you have to try. And France alone won't be able to fund that disruptive innovation. 10 billion euros, that's a lot of money, and that's also nothing when you are looking at what is needed to fund disruptive innovation. So I would call all European countries, especially the members of the Eurozone, to create a fund for disruptive innovation at the European level so that we can be able to fund the disruptive innovation at the same level as China and the United States already do. That's the way of being and remaining an economic and innovative power in the world of tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. So, Mr. Van Overtveldt, same question and perhaps a reaction to the proposal of Mr. Maire.
Well, of course, the digital revolution is an important challenge for the finance industry, that's for sure. And I'm happy to see that in the finance industry, more and more people, decision-making people, are starting to realize that in order to view this as a kind of adversary thing, to appreciate the benefits that might come from mutual cooperation. And as a matter of fact, if you look at it carefully, there's a lot to say for that mutual cooperation to effectively take place. Because on the one hand, you have let's say the traditional financial companies, the banks, the insurance companies, who certainly, most of them have a quite impressive capital base. They also have, how should I say, regulatory know-how in-house. And on the other hand, you have high-tech companies usually looking for capital, usually looking for better entrance into the regulatory framework because it's relatively new to them. And so a kind of marriage is certainly beneficial for both sides. And like I said, I see a lot of progress in that respect, and especially from the finance industry. I think more and more people there start to realize that in order to focus on the threats that might come out of these technological developments, they are looking for the opportunities and try to get these opportunities into the reality for their own companies and for the broader financial sector. I think that's very important that the threat aspect, the so-called destructive aspect, is less taken into account, and that one focuses very much more on the potentiality of cooperation for all the parties involved.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Well, I'm a fintech entrepreneur, so I like to focus on the positive. But Mr. Gramegna, do you see any dangers ahead from the revolution we're seeing?
Well, there's always dangers that go along with opportunities. So I'd like to pick up what both Johan and Bruno have said. We have a lack of investment in Europe in the field of fintech, but not only in the field of fintech, in general. Fortunately, the economy is picking up, and we see investment picking up in investment in most countries of Europe, which is good news. I support the idea that Bruno Le Maire said that we should put as much financial means into common action. The field of fintech, I can subscribe that immediately. That's one thing. The second thing is the game is about following. Disrupt or being disrupted. So you have not that much choice. If you do not anticipate, you're going to be kicked out of the market. So I think this is a kind of commercial risk, which is very huge. That brings me back to what I mentioned before when I said investments in data centers is a very good example of something we should do at European level, and then also in disruptive technologies. The Commission of the European Union decided, for example, to put its supercomputer in Luxembourg because we have invested 10 years ago. So it's a very good example of how investments in the future pay off. We are going to sign, Johan and I, in a couple of minutes, a cooperative agreement between Beehive and the Luxembourg House of Financial Technologies. And our loft has already signed a lot of such agreements because the new economy is also a collaborative economy. And let's face it, I mean, there was a lot of talk about tax. I'm going to surprise probably many people in the room. I do not think that tax in fintech is the key. I really don't think so. These companies are eager to have access to market, and they have a business model that is completely different than the new economy. So it's nice, it's good to have a good tax framework, but in the end, what they need is access to market. I see it in the context of Brexit. Lots of new companies have come to Luxembourg and said, because the UK is losing the access to the EU single market, we as a small, new, upcoming company, we want to be inside the EU single market. So there's lots of other issues that will play a role. And last but not least, yes, money laundering and financing of terrorism is of the utmost importance. That must be part of the framework which we are working about in the European Union. We're going to continue that. We support that fully. So this is a risk. But let's face it, that risk existed also in traditional currencies, it exists in the traditional economy. So let's not make it look worse because it's the new economy or fintech, but let's make sure that we have the same safety and security issues dealt with in this new economy.
Mr. Šapoka, does anything in the fintech world keep you awake at night?
So talking about risks, so you cannot even marry without a risk. So it is a part of our life. So let me be clear on that. And when we talk about financial market, specifically about banks, for many years discussing banking, we were talking about banks, we were talking about risk reduction, risk sharing, banks. When we when we talk about fintech, what we are talking about? We are talking about speed, simplicity, consumer needs, effectiveness, efficiency. So I am very positive on this side, and I do believe that there is room for more cooperation between traditional service providers and innovative fintech companies. And I do agree that the main risk that we underestimate changes in the future. So the biggest risk that we can invest too less. So this is a very clear message. And investing into future technologies, of course, for a country, it is a huge risk because almost every idea will fail, but almost every. And some of them will just grow through the roof. And why I do believe that risks in fintech are less than comparing to traditional financial industry. Because as I said, now a consumer is at the center. And this is a good message for the society. Now you are again important.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. So I am looking at time because I know Mr. Lemaire has to leave at 5:30. So I will mix two questions in one. You mentioned, Mr. Lemaire, Brexit at the beginning of this interview. And we all have this B word in mind. So we all saw in the newspapers the last few months the very creative way all of you have to show how your country could be the best to replace London or to replace UK in general and so on. My question is two in one. First, what do you think is the impact of Brexit on finance industry in Europe? And secondly, how could we work all together? Because I think behind our countries we have Europe, even if we forgot the flag behind. I'm sorry for that. There is no flag, but we all think we are all European country here. So how do we try to have European champion in the future? Because for China or US, sorry, but when I'm traveling, I'm not sure they know where is Lithuania, Luxembourg, or even sometimes France on the map. For them, it's Europe. So how do we manage to have global champion and to foster them, being fintech, or being also our existing banks or industrial, for some of them who are suffering right now of this digital transformation? That's my question for all of you.
Well,
short.
in less than 2 minutes.
No, because perhaps you will leave before the end, and they will continue to answer when you leave.
And once again, I apologize for being obliged to leave at 5:30. Maybe 2 or 3 short remarks. The first one is to insist on the fact that I like the British people very much. I like the UK very much. Let's be clear on that. And I deeply regret the decision that has been taken by the British people. I really think that it would have been better for the French people and for the European people to keep the British people among the European family. But they have decided, so we have to take into account that decision. We have to be more attractive, and we are doing our best with the president to be as attractive as possible, and I really think that France has all the assets to be one of the most attractive countries in Europe. We have also to be fair on the Brexit. And I share the point of view expressed by Pierre. There is a single market. There are rules. We have to find a compromise between the UK and the European countries. But things must be clear. A pick and choose solution cannot be a solution for the UK. So you cannot say, well, we are taking what is interesting for us in the single market, and we are not accepting the rules of the single market. That's not possible. You cannot be in and out, whether you are in with all the assets and all the rules of the single market, or you're out. And that's the way we have to define with our British friends. On the question of the European champions, I really think that we should do our best to do in the fintechs what we are ready to do and what we have already done in other sectors. Let's look at what we have been able to do in the railway industry sector. We have been able to make a merger between Alstom and Siemens. And if we want to face the competition of the Chinese CRRC, we need to gather our forces. Divided, we will fail. United, we will be successful. This is the truth for the industry, for the railway industry, for the aeronautical industry, for the space industry. It will be also the case for the fintech industry.
Thank you very much. Same question for you, Mr. Van Overtveldt.
Thank you. I totally agree with Bruno with respect to the way in which we should look upon the UK in terms of the negotiations that are going on. We used to say in Belgium, you cannot be half pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. So it's a choice. It's a choice you make, and it's a choice you make with the two of normally with two people. Anyway, we are quite humble in Belgium. We think that London will be around for quite a long time as an important financial center, whatever the Brexit discussion or whatever direction the Brexit discussion goes. And so what we try to do is to offer a gateway to mainland Europe for financial companies that want to assure themselves, whether they stay in the UK or not, to have a stronghold on mainland Europe. And I think we succeeded quite well with respect to the insurance sector, where we attracted London, Lloyd's of London, and in the slipstream of that, several of the quite important insurance companies. So that's, I think, for the short and medium term, the way we think about how how Brexit will affect us. But I want to make a quick remark here on something that I think is very important that has even become more important now that we are faced with the Brexit discussion and all the aftermath that might give. I think it should inspire us to go all the way to the deepening of the monetary union, finalization of the banking union, deepening of the monetary union, so that we have a real functioning, efficient, constructive monetary union. I think that's important. And as part of that, I think we also need to do all we can to get the capital markets union up and running as soon as possible. I hope, and I feel some, how should I say, inspiration in that direction, that the Brexit discussion might speed up the discussions and, of course, then also the decision-making on those two issues.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Well, I don't know about anyone else in the audience, but I'm feeling a little bit isolated at this end of the,
Only UK guy,
the auditorium. And I don't think I'm going to have much chance of single-handedly winning a negotiation on behalf of the British government. But I did read with interest how the Bank of England pronounced that they were going to make allowances for European banks to retain their branch status in London following Brexit and look favourably upon passporting from Europe into Britain, which obviously was a bit of an olive leaf. Do any of the European ministers, or particularly perhaps Mr. Gramegna, share any of that optimism?
Well, maybe I could say also a few words on Brexit. I deeply regret it, but we have to respect it. Point number one. Point number two, you cannot have a cake and eat it at the same time. Completely agree. On the other hand, we must not punish the United Kingdom, and certainly we must still remember that London is the largest financial center in the world. And it is in the interest of the 27 countries that in one way or another, in this negotiation afterwards, we can do smart business together. It's not in the interest of the 27 that the UK drifts into the Atlantic, because the winners could be other financial centers than those that we think of. But again, total solidarity with what has been said. We must make sure that it is not an advantage to go out and then be able to passport in. Obviously, that cannot be done. Let's also face it. It has been a decision, the Brexit, that has cost the UK already quite a lot. I remember that in all the years I've been a finance minister since 2013, the growth rate in the UK was double the rate of the average of the Eurozone. Now it's the other way around. The Eurozone is growing 2 to 2.5%, and the growth rate in the UK is 1%. So obviously it's hurting them more, and fortunately Europe is in a good mood, optimistic, investing, and that's opened up possibilities for deepening the EMU. I completely agree with that, and we will proactively work with all the colleagues in the Eurozone to achieve that, because only united we can succeed. This is true for sectors, for investment, but it is, let's face it, when we had the Euro crisis in 2012 and 2013, many people were asking me when I was going to Hong Kong, they would ask me, is the Euro going to survive? I was there 2 weeks ago, nobody asked me that question. And everybody said, well, you did it. You did the banking union. Everybody told me, nobody has ever done this. You'll never be able to do it. And once we did it, you're never going to implement it. And we are doing it. So there's lots of beautiful stories to be able to tell about Luxembourg and Europe in general. And let's tell those stories. And let's be positive about it. And in fact, good news is no news, but I tell you, if you look at the financial sector of Europe today, if you look at the tier 1 capital, it used to be 8%, it's 14% today. Our financial stability is unmatched in the world already today. And in the next years is even going to be stronger. So I'm very optimistic for Europe. We're going to attract a lot of investment and capital. Ask all the advisors, they tell you, Europe is the place to invest. That's where you get the most value for your money. That's the place where the shares are lowest compared to the potential. So we are in a very positive mood. Let's use it to be united.
And lastly, Mr. Šapoka, what impact do you think Brexit will have on
First of all,
European
I'd
industry?
like to say that I fully share the views which have already been expressed. And I'll touch 2 angles, competition and competitiveness. So if we look to Brexit as a trigger for very important processes in financial industry and fintech. So it's triggered competition among member states. And at the same time, we realized that working together, we can be very competitive comparing ourselves with such markets as China, the United States, and others. So this is very important. From this angle, the value was created. And not only for businesses, but also for consumers, because competition is always, benefit goes to both sides. So this is good news. Of course, I would like to be very clear on those negotiations. It is clear among our colleagues at EU level that we are speaking one voice with negotiators from other side. But let's find opportunities in this. And if we can compete with each other and we can show very quick results, so we can compete on a global level together. So I think this is a good message for us.
I will just ask you to cope with the timing and finish. If we can just, all of you, give just 1 minute conclusion word. And perhaps we begin by you, Mr. Le Maire, and all of you can give 1 minute, and we will close this panel in order to stay in the timing.
2 words. The first one, thank you. Thank you for that meeting and that exchange of views. And the second one to all the European states, including France, wake up.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Overtveldt?
That was even shorter than 1 minute, Bruno.
Because he's in a hurry.
So now we're in competition to shorten and shorten.
Yeah.
No. Also very brief, because only 1 minute. I strongly believe that the developments in the technological sector, broadly defined, will have a positive impact on the financial sector, on the way in which the financial needs of the economy are met. And so I encourage everybody, the tech sector and the financial sector, to keep on doing what they're doing and getting closer together to get to optimal results.
Thank you.
I will try to be brief too. I thank you very much for this event, and I have 2 things to say. 1, Europe is back. Let's be happy about it and let's build on that. 2, fintech is there to stay, and you can be sure that the 4 of us are going to make sure that you're going to come to our countries.
Mr. Šapoka?
So fintech is less about fin and less about tech. It's more about creativity. So since the creativity is our future, let's invest into our future.
So thank you very much. I will take you on your word, on Mr. Gramegna. Europe is back, and I do hope to see you next year, 29 and 30 of January, to tell us 1 year later what happened. Because many of us in the age we had, in the 80s we had a dream of Europe, and recently if UK voted no, it's not only because they are nasty or whatever, but they didn't dream anymore about Europe. Make us dream. Thank you very much.